Okay, here's the thing. Fallout 2 is a fantastic game, a nearly perfect follow-up to Interplay's post-apocalypse masterpiece. It took everything good from Fallout and amplified it to new lengths, while also adding some new features and ideas wrapped around an entirely new story to tell. But there's still something that Fallout 1 has over its sequel, something that makes me prefer the original game ever so slightly. So, if I haven't lost you yet to this lukewarm take, let's go ahead and dive into Fallout's perfect sequel. Well, almost. Fallout 2 is a direct sequel to its predecessor. Development of the game started as early as the summer of '97, before Fallout 1 was even complete. It's not really surprising when you see that Fallout 2 was released almost exactly a year after Fallout. Interplay, and more specifically its RPG game division Black Owl Studios, began brainstorming the direction to continue the story of Fallout, because even before its release, they knew that they had something special. There were ideas of using the same protagonist, the Vault Dweller, having him get beaten and robbed, losing all of his items in exchange for some juicy post-traumatic amnesia, so he can explore the wasteland again with relatively new eyes. Luckily, that idea didn't make the cut, along with several others. The story we did end up with was far more interesting. And if you're concerned with spoilers, this entire video will dissect not only the plot of the game, but also several side quests, characters, and factions throughout. So if you're worried about having this 23-year-old game spoiled, then, I don't know, go play it or something. Anyway, Fallout 2. After the events of Fallout 1, after being banished from the Vault 13, the Vault Dweller and a few friends he met along the way traveled north to Oregon and settled a village called Arroyo. Decades pass before the Vault Dweller writes his life memoirs and just up and leaves the village, never to be heard from again. He leaves behind not only his life story, but also a family, including the player character of Fallout 2, the Chosen One, his grandchild. At the start of Fallout 2, Arroyo is looking pretty shitty, to say the least. It's suffered from the worst drought since its conception, and the Chosen One, you, are tasked with going out and getting a GECK or a Garden of Eden creation kit, a Vault-Tec device used to create thriving communities out of the post-apocalypse wasteland. So, you're given your Grandpappy's Vault 13 jumpsuit, his Pip-Boy 2000, and a water flask, and sent on your way into the waste. Meanwhile, some big shit's been popping off in the world outside of your little tribal village. A new government has been established called the New California Republic, or NCR, something your old grandpa's actually responsible for. A new organization known as the Enclave has been slowly emerging around the waste, flaunting some crazy technology. And a new drug named Jet has been ravaging towns and villages alike due to its high addiction rate, but also paving the way for organized crime revolving around the production and distribution of it. The Chosen One learns of all this in time though, as they explore the wastes looking for a GECK, eventually finding one and returning to their village to make things all happy. But shit hits the fan, of course. The big spooky Enclave has shown up and killed or taken everyone captive, so now you have to find a way to save them and destroy the Enclave. You discover that the Enclave is actually the remnants of pre-war United States government, president and overeager secretary and all. The Chosen One finds their way into the Enclave's base, an offshore oil rig, by activating an old tanker ship chilling in San Francisco. You learn that the Enclave's objective is to eradicate the world of anything mutated, and seeing how the world's been nuked to shit, it's going to eradicate nearly everything living outside of the Enclave, leaving the Enclave in control. The Enclave took your village's people and also the remaining people of Vault 13 because they needed test subjects for the FEV, the same FEV that the Master tried to use in the first game. However, the Enclave is using it to its opposite effect. Instead of mutating people into super mutants, they are engineering the virus to kill mutated DNA. But that doesn't matter, because you promptly shut that shit down, bringing your villagers back to Arroyo with the GECK, creating a prosperous community for years to come. Now, yes, that is quite a simple main questline, and it's eerily similar to Fallout 1's main questline of retrieving a water chip to save your vault. Arroyo is in a drought, Vault 13 is in a drought, sort of. A lucky person from each community is set out into an entirely unknown and foreign wasteland to save their people. After each said hero has retrieved the object that will give their communities water, they are redirected to fight some big bad organized group that threatens the wasteland. But I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Chosen One, huh? Well, pardon me for not blowing sunshine up your ass, but I'm a little too busy for this, Your Highness.
Fallout 2's development focused on the same thing as Fallout 1, telling a story. Interplay and Blackout Studios never had desires to pursue the top technology in gaming, having the best features out there or the most powerful engine. They always wanted to tell a story and to create a fascinating role-playing experience. And in regards to both games, they hit the ball out of the park. In Fallout 2, they did want to expand, to make things bigger and better, which they succeeded at, but they didn't spend their 1 year of development time revamping anything graphically or changing the combat system. Instead, that year was put towards fleshing out new stories, new locations, new factions, new characters, new experiences. If you look at some of the technological masterpieces being released around the same time as Fallout 2, you might just see how little they cared about being on the cutting edge of tech. Games like Ocarina of Time, Half-Life, Metal Gear Solid, all games that make Fallout 2 look years behind them. As Tim Kaine once said, "My idea is to explore more of the world and more of the ethics of a post-nuclear world, not to make a better plasma gun." Like I said though, they still do go bigger and better. The scale of Fallout 2 is much larger, nearly double the locations of Fallout spread across a landscape that's twice as big. They also matured in their writing style, going off of positive feedback that they received. People praised Fallout for its adult themes and serious tone, so Blackout Studios hammered down on this. Things like drugs, sex, slavery, and of course, brutality of man are much more prevalent in Fallout 2. The opening cutscene involves a family, adult and children alike, being mowed down by a minigun-toting Enclave soldier. And this isn't even the only time you see this happen in the game. Jet, as mentioned before, is a new drug introduced in this game that plays a pretty big role in a lot of towns. It's mostly seen in New Reno, where multiple organized crime families feud over selling it and making money from it, while junkies and dealers walk the streets. But there's also places like Redding, where Jet has absolutely ravaged the city, allowing for the population to become so reliant on it that the Mordino crime family, the one that's responsible for Jet production, tries to take control of the town entirely, which the Chosen One can stop if they go about pursuing an antidote to addiction, but like most things in the game, are not required. Slavery is another big topic brought to light in Fallout 2. It's big business. While the cons did take slaves in Fallout 1, it's not nearly on the same scale as the second game. The slavers are pretty much their own faction that the Chosen One can interact with, and you can even join them, becoming branded as a slaver, giving you negative karma and reputation with nearly every other NPC in the game. But like Fallout goes, it is always an option that allows you to trade in companions to the slavers in exchange for cold hard cash. Vault City is a faux utopia of sorts that uses slaves or servants or whatever they call them to do the menial tasks around the city. They pride themselves on giving the servants a place to live, food, water, and education. But at the end of the day, they're still taking in people against their will and making them work for them. Much better than being enslaved in the den, I'm sure, but it still brings the morality of it into question. The NCR, as an established government, is entirely against slavery, which brings up more quest lines on the subject. There are slave pens just outside the NCR capital that you can be tasked with destroying and freeing the slaves if you decide you want to get in the NCR's good graces. And it's no big surprise that the NCR hates slavers. Tandy is the president of the NCR, but was also captured into slavery by the cons in Fallout 1, and then rescued by the Vault Dweller. So being the Vault Dweller's grandkid and continuing the tradition of destroying slaves on behalf of a former slave that he once rescued is pretty poetic in a way. Sex and prostitution is another thing that's way more prevalent. It was seen in Fallout, Cynthia in Junktown and various prostitutes at the Maltese Falcon are seen, but it's mostly minor appearances. In Fallout 2, there are sex workers everywhere. The Cat's Paw, Streets of New Reno, Sally Dutton's bathhouse, and plenty more, on top of the Chosen One themselves being able not only to partake in business with these fine ladies, but also becoming a sex worker themselves. A female character can work at the Hole for $50 a customer, or $200 with the speech check, to make some extra cash, and male or female characters can work at the Golden Globes in New Reno, becoming either a fluffer for cash or even a full-fledged porn star depending on charisma. Hilariously, there is a whole formula in the game to decide if you have the chops to be a porn star. These are all dark aspects of the game that Black Owl Studios gave great focus to amplify the gritty world of the post-apocalypse, and they did an amazing job at incorporating the themes into the game. In addition to the positive feedback of adult themes and darker tones, people love the quirky pop culture references from Fallout, and this is where things start to get a little bit iffy. Pop culture references were few and far in between in Fallout. But going off the praise that they received, Black Owl Studios again decided to hammer down on the positive feedback. People loved seeing references to the real world encapsulated in this ravaged post-nuclear landscape. But in Fallout's case, it was done with care and deliberation. The characters even stated that they wanted the Easter eggs to be unobstructing, and if the player got the joke, then great, more value for them. But for the people who didn't get the reference, it shouldn't seem like something was too out of place. In Fallout 2, all that jazz was thrown to the wolves. It's hard to go through a single quest or explore a single town without some sort of reference or fourth wall break.
I thought there weren't children because this might be the European version of Fallout 2.
It's good for a few chuckles here and there, but it's relentless, and it's really tacky when playing the game directly after Fallout 1. It just changed the whole mood of the game, trying to navigate these new established darker themes of slavery, drugs, and human cruelty, all while getting bogged down with references to Lassie, or Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or Goodfellas, or Monty Python, or Star Trek, or Rocky, or South Park. It just was kind of abrasive, to say the least. Yeah, most of them were unobstructive, but come on, save little Timmy that fell down the fucking well, get out of here. It's not the references themselves, just more so a big middle finger to the attitude and the atmosphere of the first game, which is something that made it so damn special. The pop culture reference explosion is mostly at the fault of the development process of the game. Once Fallout 2 started development, there was a sort of hemorrhage of staff that worked on the first game. Tim Kaine, Leonard Boyarsky, and Jason Anderson all left to start up their own company, Troika Games. That, on top of a different approach to compiling the game in general. Each area was delegated to a small team of 2 or 3 people, and collaboration between the teams wasn't as common as development on the first game, and they mostly went unsupervised. This resulted in an often disconnected feeling in the game world, and while each team had their own area that they can shove their own pop culture references into, they didn't collaborate with the other teams unless it had something to do with a major questline or character arc, so you can see how these references just began to pile up. It's not only an inflation of references that resulted from this disconnected development, but some of the cities and settlements on the map just don't jive with one another. There are distinct tone shifts from town to town. Take for example MODOK, one of the more gimmicky feeling towns. It has the Lassie quest, it has a Deathclaw chicken, it has 2 friends quarreling over a stolen watch that's actually just lost in a toilet that you must blow up, spreading shit across the entire town, but hey, at least the watch is back. It's a goofy town, slightly redeemed by Ghost Town, but only slightly. Compare that to, say, Vault City, probably one of my favorite locations. It's a sterile feeling dystopia disguised as a utopia, and all the citizens have their heads firmly placed up their own rear ends. It's really just as grimy and scummy as the rest of the wasteland, the perfect juxtaposition to right outside the city gates. Peasants gawking and looking at its clean appearance while sleeping in the dirt, knowing that the only way that they'll ever actually be let in is as a slave scrubbing toilets. Everyone inside the gates lacks morals, has a massive ego, and are only looking out for their bottom dollar, and it has probably the biggest cunt in video game history running the show.
Do you have any conception of how busy I am? I run this city and have precious little time to waste with you.
It too has its lighthearted moments, like finding dusty storage lockers full of dozens of water chips, the mythical item that the Vault Dweller spent the entire game of Fallout 1 looking for. But these light moments are used sparingly, and for that I am thankful. The disconnected feeling is also present between the 2 games. Like I said, I played Fallout 1 and 2 essentially back to back, so the tonal differences were pretty harsh. Granted, Fallout 2 does take place 80 years post Fallout 1, which understandably affects the landscape of the game. While Fallout 1 wore its bleakness on its sleeve, humanity was barely holding on in a depressing and depraved world. Fallout 2 showed something that was only hinted at in Fallout 1. Hope. Fallout 2 has societies and settlements that are comfortable, and more than that, they are thriving. The NCR, Vault City, New Reno, and San Francisco, all thriving and surviving in their own ways. The NCR has grown from a humble Shady Sands to a monumental force in the wasteland, trying to establish some semblance of actual society across multiple towns and cities with a structured government system. Vault City forming from inhabitants of Vault 8, becoming a medical powerhouse of the wasteland, as well as having fertile soil and solid building structures thanks to the Gek. New Reno is thriving in its own way. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's happy, but multiple families have grown to power, providing both entertainment and jobs to the city, even though that the jobs support organized crime. And San Francisco, mostly inhabited by descendants of a Chinese submarine that crashed there, and Hubologists, a religious cult pretty much mocking Scientology. San Francisco is a hub of technology. The emperor of the city is a freaking computer. Now, let's compare that to Fallout 1, where the Brotherhood of Steel is the only semblance of a functioning society. The next best thing is the hub, or maybe Junktown, neither of which can be described as thriving. This particular disconnect is not unwelcome to me. I actually like this attention to the timeline here. I'm happy to see that some places take off and rebuild and make a new world out of the ashes of the past, but the obvious disconnect of places within Fallout 2 is not as kosher. And it's not just locations either. Some of the quest lines are a little out of touch.
Don't have any? You expect me to believe that, maggot? The truth is, you lost an expensive piece of Army-issue equipment. That suit is going to come out of your pay, and you will remain in this man's army until you are 510 years old, which is the number of years it will take for you to pay for a Mark II powered combat armor you have lost. Report to the armory and have a new suit issued to you, then report back to me, Private. Dismissed.
Let me first praise the quest writing a little bit in Fallout 2 before I start nitpicking. Like I said earlier, the total time of development was mainly spent on advancing the stories and experiences of the game, rather than graphical or mechanical advancements, and that time was well spent for the most part. Quest lines are far more ambitious. Some side quests involve traveling from town to town, something that's not seen too often in Fallout 1. It created this illusion of, contradictory to what I just spent the last several minutes bitching about, interconnectivity between the locations, giving the idea that people don't just idle around in their respective cities, minding their own, but rather they're out there traveling and creating communications and networks throughout the wasteland. Vault City, of course, has a few great examples. You're tasked with communicating and appeasing interest between Vault City and Gecko, as well as the NCR on behalf of Lynette, because, well, she's too busy, I guess.
I believe it is time you left. I suggest you make your stay in Vault City a short one.
You help the Vault City's military force scout areas of the wasteland to give them some more oversight into the happenings of the world, and you even deliver a madman's briefcase to the head of one of the main crime families in New Reno. You don't really know what's in it, but it's neat to establish these intertwined plot lines across the wasteland. It helps with the tonal discohesion stated prior. Most locations have strong themes to them that lend more unique experiences and activities, even though it breaks up the overall cohesion in the game. In New Reno, you can quarrel with various crime families, sleep with a mob boss's wife, get your car jacked by chop shop thugs, and even become a porn star. Head over to Redding and you can play sheriff. You can evict a widow. Just kidding, you better be paying for Miss Rooney's rent, you heathen. You can kill some aliens in a mine shaft and some guy named Frog. Go to San Francisco and you have people forming their culture around kung fu holotapes and AI emperors running the city. And hey, Scientologist, is that Tom Cruise? Each location is like this, some with stronger themes to them than others, but the idea of having a wasteland full of independent places with their own histories and legacies to leave makes the game a sort of post-apocalypse theme park, which is something that was carried on into later titles and is undoubtedly a good thing for the series, at least in my opinion. But now I'm going to talk about what I didn't like as far as the writing. Things that just mess with the established world at hand are first and foremost. Like ghosts. Legit floating apparitions are a part of Fallout now. Well, just the one, at least. The quest involving the ghost of Anna Winslow is probably the least favorite thing that I encounter in the game. You're given the task to return her bones to her grave so that she can rest and stop haunting the building she is in. I know Fallout isn't exactly flaunting any semblance of realism here, but bringing the supernatural so front and center was a little off-putting to me. I thought that it was going to have some kind of explanation or reasoning behind it, but Nope, just a little ghosty haunting the wasteland. Also, telepathic messages that you get from your village shaman are just annoying. Not only is it again bringing in supernatural elements, but it just doesn't fit in the established world of Fallout. The same goes for Melchior, who can just summon fucking Deathclaws and other creatures out of the goo spilled onto the floor. Freaking ridiculous, and a really annoying fight as well. These specific instances break the world building, which to me is a big no-no, because I like the radiation and the FEV and the unrealistic science fiction, but not the unrealistic supernatural occurrences. Goofy quests are another thing that I'm not sure if I truly like or dislike, because while I enjoyed most of them, and I like the trend of having silly quests in Fallout carried on to later titles with great effect, they too break the atmosphere of Fallout when they are a little too out there. Like playing chess with a scorpion, or in similar effect, replanting a sentient plant into more fertile soil to be rewarded with the secrets on how to beat said scorpion at chess. Retrieving a spleen that some guy lost because he betted on a hand in poker. Retrieving a porn mag, beer, and a sex doll for some ghoul for a promise of treasure just to find out that it was like 10,000 bottle caps. A now obsolete currency, which, by the way, caps is the true currency of Fallout. The choice to go back to them in later games was 100% the correct choice. Anyway, there are dozens of quests that are just plain silly in this game. The town Broken Hills is super well written. It has an in-depth racial conflict going on in the town, sitting between super mutants, humans, and ghouls, who are all living among each other. You know those goofy quests that I just mentioned a second ago? Half of them are in Broken Hills. In this process of investigating missing humans and finding them slain underground due to the rising conflict and racial tension, you are playing chess with a scorpion. Not only that, in the actual quest itself, you confront the super mutant that you suspect is responsible for killing all the humans, and he challenges you to an arm wrestling match. A match that if you lose, you end up as his gimp for the night, waking up with a ball gag in your inventory and everything. It's just silly writing, crammed in everywhere, even into these amazing quest lines with so much potential for something more dark and serious. I'm all for adding humor into Fallout, and I think it's necessary for the charm of the world to work. But like the pop culture references, it's something that's overdone in Fallout 2. Magic and supernatural occurrences aren't exactly in the same boat as the quote-unquote realism in the game. But I guess for some reason we're all okay with aliens being a recurring thing in the games, because even they were in Fallout 1. I will say though, having just returned Anna's bones to the grave before heading to the ghost farm, my expectations for what was going to happen were truly heightened, because at this point anything goes. Other than the outlier goofy quests, most quests were super fleshed out and incredibly captivating, not only for the quest itself, but because a lot of them start establishing a deeper lore system of the Fallout world. A lot of things were left unknown and unexplored in Fallout. Fallout 2 thankfully picks up the pieces and starts to establish some real lore in the game. Vault-Tec lore as a whole was added into Fallout 2. Fallout 1 never intended to have Vault-Tec be anything more than the corporation behind, well, vaults. But Fallout 2 brought to light some sinister backstory. Vault-Tec using vaults as experiments, the absolute enormity of the vault systems, even showing some vaults that actually made it. And it's not just Vault-Tec lore, the lore of the Fallout world was essentially established in the second game. The war, the reason behind nukes ever being dropped, is referenced a little bit more. There's a supercomputer in San Francisco that was salvaged from a Chinese submarine used in the war, half the population of San Francisco being descendants from the Chinese invaders of America. All great lore, but most importantly, the Enclave's existence, harkening back to the pre-war United States government and their current motivation to wipe any mutated creatures off the face of the earth. Even just being exposed to the wasteland like the people of Arroyo is unacceptable for them. I do think that the Enclave was a better enemy faction as a whole than the Master's army. Their ideology is more solid, and their existence is given to you up front in the game. You don't know who they are, but boy oh boy do you not want to fuck with them. My man just one-punched a Deathclaw. While the Master himself is better written and presented, Frank Horrigan has to be one of my all-time favorite villains in the game, let alone just Fallout. He is the figurehead of the Enclave, the giant super mutant in power armor. The president may have been the brains, but
the President of the United fucking States of America. Who do you think I was talking about? The fuck? Who is it? What? I should kick your fucking ass. Who is this?
Big Daddy Frank is the top dog.
Me,
Frank Horrigan, that's who. United States Secret Service. You aren't going anywhere from here.
The Enclave as a whole is a much more oppressive force. When you're tasked with scouting Navarro by the Brotherhood, you get a sense of just how massive and intimidating the Enclave's operation is. It's a great looming force that makes you sit back and go, well shit, I guess I have to do something about this. It's fantastic, and it's one of the best parts of Fallout 2. But even more was built up on: the Hubologists, the NCR, jet and drug production, slavers, and the role of slavery in Fallout in general. Being able to sell off your companions or even your spouse to slavers in exchange for money. But I do wish that places like San Francisco were a little more established, maybe provided more of a Chinese perspective on the war, or just squeak in a little more backstory for all the fans that care. But overall, there was a deliberate attempt at lore building and adding depth beyond the main character's plight in Fallout 2.
You moron! You are not to question my orders! When I say jump, you jump! When I say fight, you fight! When I tell you to die for your country, then you will certainly die! Have I made myself clear?
As stated before, gameplay was not expanded on significantly at all in the sequel. So if you didn't like it in the first game, then I got some bad news for you. A few things were added to the game: more variety in items, more variety in weapons, more armor options, all things requiring varying degrees of skills and perks so you can play through with different character builds and have a better time and truly do combat how you like to. The combat itself was not changed at all, which to me is a bummer, because it's not like it was great to begin with. Fallout 2 only makes its negative qualities more apparent because the amount of combat that you do in the sequel is increased significantly. There's more enemies at one time, and the ability to have several companions at once can slow combat to a snail's pace. Waiting for 10 to 15 NPCs to make their turn before you can shoot and potentially miss again was frustrating and definitely not a great part of the game. On top of that, combat was significantly more difficult in Fallout 2. In Fallout 1, there was obvious progression to the player's character's strengths with respect to the enemies that you encounter. In Fallout 2, even at a high level, with top tier weapons and armor, you can get fucked up real quick at any point in the game. Not even just by the Enclave either. Fighting the Wanamingos in the mine or Melchior had me dying over and over again, or losing a companion. Shit was tough, and tough isn't necessarily bad, but when it's tough and not that fun to do, it is a bit of a slog. Other than combat not changing, one system that changed much for the better was the companion system. You can now control more aspects of companionship: their temperament, their gear, the distance that they stay away from you, and perhaps the best addition to the entire game, the ability to move them the fuck out of the way. In these isometric games, it's super common for companions to block doorways or just in general be in the way. But now you get a little unobstructive command to tell them to scoot, and I love it. Even more, the companions that you get are all S tier. You got Marcus, you got Cassidy, you got K9, you got Sulik, the first companion option that you will meet in the game. He is better than every companion in Fallout 1. Yes, even Dogmeat, because Grampy Bone is a gangster. Several other small things were added into Fallout 2 that changed the game mostly for the positive. There's new perks added to vary up the way that you build your character even further. A karma system was added to go along with the existing reputation system. Reputation still changes the way a specific town will act towards you, but karma now changes how people as a whole act towards you in the whole wasteland, as well as giving added titles to the character depending on their actions, like Gravedigger, Gigolo, or Slaver. The cherry on top is more creature comforts to the playability and interactivity of the game, like moving NPCs out of your way, or trading more than 1,000 caps at a time, and a freaking car, boosting travel speed exponentially, even allowing for upgrades like trunk storage of items that I'm totally going to use before the end of the game. So now that we've explained the differences between the two games, both praising and bashing Fallout 2, I think it's time that I try to wrap my head around my thoughts on both games and explain why I still prefer the first game over the sequel.
Boy, are you stupid and dead.
I totally get why some people prefer Fallout 2 over the original game. It's bigger, broader, has more of pretty much everything, but that is also the same reason that it ranks lower to me. Fallout had moderation. That game understands that post-apocalyptic settings aren't meant to be fantasies. They're meant to be tragedies. Yes, there is room for breaks in realism, and of course there's some room for dark comedy, but they should be an accessory to tragedy. Fallout is the only game in the entire series that captures this. Starting with Fallout 2, there is a departure from bleakness being the forefront of the series. Like many people, I started the Fallout series with Fallout 3, and I only decided to play the classic games in recent years. The tone and theme of the original Fallout has cemented itself as probably my favorite game in the series, so seeing Fallout 2 immediately creates a shift in attitude was a little upsetting. Depression and loneliness were traded in for jokes and sheer entertainment. It's easy to be part of either camp and be warranted, but for me, 2 brings more entertainment, for sure, but at the expense of immersion and atmosphere that 1 excelled at establishing. Fallout 1 has a vibe. It's a cohesive world. You are the Vault Dweller. It is you versus the unknown. You against the Renkins and the Rad Scorpions, super mutants, ghouls, deathclaws, this fucking guy, all new to you as a player and as the Vault Dweller. An unforgiving wasteland for you to face and explore. And it's something that can never be replicated. That feeling. The reason that Fallout remains supreme. No matter how much everything has improved, the feeling isn't replicated. Saving Arroyo never quite motivated me as much as saving Vault 13. And maybe it's because it's a copy and pasted main questline, or maybe because the depressing tale of the Vault Dweller shines through to me so much more than the Chosen One's fantastical voyage.
After the Enclave's destruction, the refugees of Arroyo and Vault 13 resettled, building a new community with the aid of the Garden of Eden creation kit. Finding themselves hundreds of miles from their vault, the members of Vault 13 chose to join the villagers in establishing a new community, and their technical expertise, combined with the villagers' survival skills, allowed the new settlement to grow and prosper. 2 generations of the same bloodline were reunited, and their savior, the Chosen One, became elder, presiding over the village in the years to come.